Hello, today is September 15th, and I am Tammy Sloop, Regional Editor for Shaw Media, and we're here with Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger, who is seeking his sixth term in Illinois' 16th District. We're also joined by Shaw Media editors Derek Barrichello and Goldie Rapp, as well as reporter Michael Urbanik. Thanks for being with us today, Congressman.
Yeah, you bet.
First question, how would you rate the federal government's response to COVID-19?
So it depends. There's a lot that we didn't know going into this. There's a lot of different agencies that have a different piece in this. I don't like giving a grade rating, but I would say pretty good. And I think it could be a lot better if we could go back in time and know what this was looking like. So if you look at a couple of big issues, number one, we would have loved to see testing ramped up faster and be able to do contact tracing, localize those outbreaks, things along that line. But we do have an issue. A lot of people don't like the federal government knowing where they've been and, following them around. And that's been some of the issues with contact tracing. But if you think about the fact that we have taken a non-existent virus that we didn't know anything about, in essence, 8-9 months ago, and we now have a regime where today people can go get tested, that in and of itself is pretty cool. And even though there were some difficulties in the past, so let's move on and do that better. The other thing will be the vaccine response. If we can get a vaccine in a short amount of time, it will be almost a record time to create a vaccine. If you look at the fact that we're still working on a vaccine for AIDS, for instance, if you look at the fact that, it takes sometimes decades to develop a vaccine for a virus. If we can actually get there by the end of this year, even next year, frankly, that'll be a great response. But there are areas where I think, quite honestly, the federal government could have done a lot better. When it comes to states, in some cases, competing against each other for PPE, when it came to states having to fight for testing, I think the federal government should have, and I had called for it at the time, done a better job of coordinating among the states to do the best there, because you don't like to see states have to go fight among themselves. But this is, to me, a call to action in terms of the future. We should never be reliant on a country like China, particularly for PPE. China had threatened to cut off our PPE. They said that the US would drown in a sea of coronavirus if we criticize China for their response to this outbreak that started in their country, more than likely from a lab. And that's a concern. And so I think when we go forward with supply chain issues, this as a country has got to be putting politics aside. And I think you guys know with me, yes, I'm a partisan, but I get tired of hyper partisanship. We've got to put that aside and say, how in the future can we protect ourselves against those supply chain vulnerabilities? And that's something I've been working with on the task force.
Okay, great. What are your thoughts on mask wearing?
I think it's good to do. Sadly, when all this started, I said to myself and a few people, I'm afraid that things like even the mask wearing is going to become partisan. And unfortunately, I was clairvoyant in that. And it shouldn't be. Look, if you're outside, here's the thing. If you're outside and you're running and you're not around anybody, you don't have to wear a mask, and you shouldn't be shamed for not wearing a mask. There's mask shaming now going on, which is silly too. But if you're inside and you're around a bunch of people, wear a mask. The reality is the mask that we wear, if it's not an N95, it's not about you deciding whether you want to be exposed to the virus. It's about other people deciding whether they want to be exposed to your virus. And I think that's the mistake. I don't know if anybody made the mistake, but I think that's the point that's missing, is wearing a mask has nothing to do with protecting you. It's protecting others from you, and it seems to work. So it's not a huge inconvenience. I flew here yesterday with a mask on the whole time. When I was in Iraq, I wore a mask a lot because of the dust, and I don't feel like my rights were suppressed at all for that.
Okay, thanks. How should Congress respond to the social unrest in the United States regarding race?
So it's a huge issue, and that's a couple of things. So I'll talk a little about kind of the legislative side, and then I just want to talk about the social side issue for a second. But legislatively, I'll tell you the one thing we shouldn't do is react by defunding police. even reducing funding on police. Because if you think that paying police less, if you think that equipping them not as well, if you think that making it much harder to recruit a police officer is going to get you better police, obviously I think we know that's not the case. The key is making sure that we can recruit the right people, we can give them the right training, we can give them body cameras, for instance. There's a lot of agencies, because it's really expensive to get body cameras, that still don't have body cameras. And most police officers I talk to, I'm a huge supporter of the police, say actually body cameras are better for them, because in many cases somebody can accuse them of something and they can show the body cam footage, which is like, yeah, I guess they weren't doing what they were accused of. So I think if we talk about doing stuff like that, that's essential. And then when it comes to police reform bills, like Tim Scott's police reform bill was really good. There was a lot of good stuff in there. It was blocked by the Democrats because they said it wasn't either enough or whatever it was, maybe the politics of it, I don't know. Stuff like that should get done. But then on the social side, here's what I think is really missing is, look, there can be a government response, and a government response is going to have some effect, right? We look to the government too much, I think, for everything. We have to be able to talk about this again. I mean, right now, there is a fear that paralyzes this country when you talk about race issues. An African American sometimes feels frightened to talk about what it's like to walk down a street and be what they feel is targeted by police. At the same time, certain African Americans say they are scared to death to talk about being Republicans because people attack them for that. I think we have to be able to, without waiting for somebody to launch an accusation of racism at us, we have to be able to talk about how we feel, what we think, and hear from each other. Because if we don't, we can say out in public all the right things, right? If you're going out there and, whatever it is, you say all the right things, but in your heart you feel angry, it's not going to solve the problem. And right now, quite honestly, if you look at whether it's Twitter, which I don't look at much anymore because it's not real life, or if you look at social media or anything, every time somebody says something, it is followed up by 9 comments or 20 comments that say Nazi, racist, whatever. And so we are scared to death to talk about real issues because we don't want to be labeled or attacked. And that is going to continue to drive the ethnicities, the races, the conversation apart. And that is going to be the problem. We have to be able to hear from each other. And that's quite honestly not something Congress can do. It's something that people are going to have to be willing to do themselves.
Are you reaching out, or are constituents reaching out to you about this issue, and how are those conversations going? What are you hearing, and what are you telling them?
I hear, it's both sides. Unfortunately, everything is so polarized right now that what you hear is either, entirely disregarding, the issue, or entirely saying we have to throw out the system because the issue is this. I think the key, so I'm hearing from all sides of the spectrum, right? I think the key on this though is we have to be able to talk to each other, and that doesn't happen right now. I mean, look, I'm not sure if my current opponent or any past opponents have done it, but if I come out and say I support police officers, you'll be attacked for being a racist now. Or if you say that, you understand that there are people out, when they are peacefully protesting, you understand there's a concern that you'll be attacked on the other side. There's too much fear right now, and fear between people leads to conflict. If two people have fear, they will fight, period. But when you understand the base of everybody's fear, you can have peace. Until then, you won't. And you can't have that without talking.
Okay. Derek, I think you have a question.
I was muted.
Hey, Derek, what's up?
You talked about the police reform bill that you had liked. What were some things in it that you liked about it?
So it had, looking at the issues of chokeholds, things along that line, looking at grants for training. They were discussing the issues of no-knock warrants, which, by the way, no-knock warrants, because maybe it was the Breonna Taylor shooting, I think there was a no-knock warrant that led to violence on that. The reality of it is no-knock warrants have to have a role in some area, because you don't want to let a high-value bad guy that you're apprehending know you're at the door. But at the same time, it can lead to some real problems. So, Tim had some really good stuff, which was a lot of, instead of launching right into putting into effect, all these programs, a lot of them were looking at it and saying, here's a timeline to get this stuff done. So that's what we need to do. And frankly, if somebody wants, for instance, if the Democrats want to put up a bill that's good, I'll vote for it. But, when they just jumped right into things like getting rid of qualified immunity, it sounds like a good talking point, right? Qualified immunity. The reality is that means that any police officer can be sued for anything by anybody. In reality, qualified immunity protects public servants from either mistakes or anything they do on the job. But right now, if a public servant knowingly violates civil rights, for instance, they don't have qualified immunity. So it's like, it's just, you have to accept an extreme or you can accept nothing. I think we should all work together to actually get this thing done. And I think, quite honestly, conversations is the starting for all of that. But I don't know if anybody will listen to me on that.
And changing the subject just a little bit, what are your thoughts on gun control, including assault weapons?
So, look, if you look at the numbers, and I'm concerned to say it because it's the knock on wood theory. Lately, mass shootings have seemed to be down. If you look at the vast majority of killings by guns, I think it's like 95% of them are from handguns with capacities under, and it's usually within, 1, 2, or 3 shots. I think banning assault weapons, for instance, is the wrong target. Now, as you guys know, I've come out and said things like bump stocks. I was the first member of Congress because I knew what a bump stock was. When I woke up that next morning and I heard the video from Vegas, I'm like, I think that's a bump stock. And I said, look, that violates, even though it may not technically violate, it violates the automatic weapons ban that this country has. You have to have an FFL, a federal firearm license, to have an automatic weapon. So I don't support assault weapon bans, but I also think, should an 18-year-old buy it when you have to be 21 to buy a handgun? No. So I think to buy an AR, for instance, or whatever you define that as, you should probably be 21. I think that makes sense. And obviously have the background check. I voted to beef up the federal background check system to make sure that nothing was slipping through. So I think those kinds of things are important. Look, I'm a concealed carry guy, and I pretty much anywhere I am, I do it, not because I think it's necessarily awesome, but because to me, in a street in Milwaukee in 2006, I wasn't armed and I almost died in a fight I intervened in. And so I saw firsthand the importance of that, somebody that's trained, that knows what they're doing. But I would also say to anybody that decides to conceal carry or open carry in some states, know what you're doing, know the stresses of combat, know what happens when you find yourself in a tough situation, because your hands go numb, you don't think like you think you will, and I think that's essential. So bottom line is, I think there's reasonable gun measures that we can put in place, but I'm a big Second Amendment guy.
Okay. Goldie, I think you have a question.
Changing the subject just a bit here, what is your position on mail-in voting?
So it's, I'll put it this way, state by state. I mean, states run elections, right? So state by state decision. Where I have a concern with mail-in voting, and I think, unfortunately, the idea of mail-in versus absentee is getting all mixed up. If Illinois wants to do mail-in voting, great. We're reacting accordingly. Obviously, campaigns adjust accordingly. Where I get concerned is when I see things like what happened in New York, where there was I forget who the member is, and I think it has been resolved, but basically this thing went off for months because you would have ballots that would come in that for some reason didn't have a postmark, some that were postmarked after Election Day. And so they had to litigate every one of those ballots. And that's what I worry about in a presidential election, particularly because we're not going to know, more than likely, unless it's a landslide, we're not going to know who wins on election night. And if you think Bush versus Gore was bad, just wait, and it's going to be in multiple states. So my concern is in terms of, getting an election result and knowing what it is and not litigating every ballot. Now, I had a conversation with the county clerks in the district. I asked them particularly about security and voting fraud issues, and they're not concerned, so I'm not concerned. They believe that they can, confirm signatures, and that they're safe and secure. So that's not, I don't worry about that maybe as much as some. And I also think, quite honestly, and I'll be critical of the president in this level, we have to quit casting doubt on the future of the election results, because the one thing that a democracy relies on, or a republic relies on, is people knowing that their vote counts, right? And if you start undermining the fact that you can vote, or that maybe there's fraud or something, it's not going to happen today or tomorrow, but someday people are going to lash out because they want to be heard, and that's not going to be pretty.
What can and should be done to improve healthcare, specifically affordable options and access, as well as prescription costs?
Mm-hmm. So it's a number of things. First off, the good news is I think naturally healthcare is going to start being more affordable and better over time because of technology. So I've seen, impending technology issues coming, I guess, or impending, let's talk about apps, for instance. If you now wear glasses, you can go on an app and do an eye test and actually get your glasses. And what it has done, optometrists don't love it because it's actually driven the cost of a visit to the eye doctor down. But if you look at that kind of stuff happening everywhere, preventative healthcare. So now you can start to see, do I have, hypertension? What are the things that exist that, I might get type 2 diabetes? Are there warning signs, things like that? When 75% of healthcare is on disease that's preventable, if we can begin to warn people early, which these apps are doing, that's a massive driving down of healthcare costs. I think portability and insurance. If you leave a job, you should be able to carry your insurance with you. And there may be a time where you have to pay a little more, but I think that portability is important. So yeah, so on that, I think competition, obviously, people banding together for the buying power of bigger groups. But I'll tell you what I don't want to see is a government takeover of healthcare, because whether it's the VA, the VA has gotten better, but in 2006, there were rats running everywhere and they were throwing waiting lists away because they got incentives based on waiting lists. That is a government-run healthcare system, and we've had to sink a lot of money and accountability into making sure that our veterans are treated right, and they're still not. So I think the bottom line, my friends on the other side of the aisle are pushing a one-size-fits-all government solution. That doesn't ever work for anything. I can't think of any time the government's taken something over and it's been better. Even the military, I mean, you can't have private sector military, but boy, if we could do private sector like acquisition in the military, we'd be doing it a lot better. So I think that's the key. On drugs and drug pricing, we have to be careful not to drive drug companies out of the United States. But at the same time, negotiating power through Medicare and Medicaid, whether it's imports from Canada. I actually had a bill that passed which fixed something within Medicaid that actually, and Medicare, where there was a loophole on generics. Little things like that can make a difference. But ultimately, I think technology is going to be a big winner in all this.
Okay. Another federal stimulus package has stalled, possibly until after the election. What do you believe needs to be in the next stimulus package?
So here's what needs to happen is people have to quit thinking about, and we're too close now, but it can't always be next election, right? And that's what's happened out here. And it's frustrating. Here's what I would do if I had my way and I wrote the next package. We'd shore up the payroll protection program. I think it's been a wild success. You can always find areas where it was screwed up, or people that got money or fraud, that shouldn't have, but the instances are pretty low of that. And typically we're able to recover that. And the economy has basically managed. I probably would do another direct payment to Americans if that was needed. I think having assistance out there for whether it's renters or landlords, because we need to make sure that the housing market stays strong, because that was kind of the driver of what happened in 08, 07. But here's what I think is really important is infrastructure. I wish it was something we could have done this summer. We've got to have a grown-up discussion about how we're paying for infrastructure. It is probably going to need a gas tax increase, okay, on the federal level. It's been 18 cents since 1994. My car in 94 got about 20 miles a gallon. My Ford Fusion Hybrid today gets 40. So I'm paying half as much as I used to drive on the interstate, despite the fact that people are more and material is more. But you have to take into account electric cars, natural gas, and all that. We need to, as adults, pay for what we're building today. I think that's actually the most fiscally conservative answer. It's not fiscally conservative to go into debt. And so I think our infrastructure would be, frankly, the best stimulus. It's the best time to do it. It would be a shot in the arm for the economy, especially if you look at our district. You look at the importance of moving goods, agriculture produced goods. You look at the importance of the rivers, and of course, people going and working and actually doing the job and not painting the road black. I'm talking about real infrastructure improvements. I think that would be the thing everybody can agree on that would have a lasting impact. And fix the system, by the way, in that process of figuring out how to pay for it, have that actually fixed for the next generation, so we don't come back here 2 years later and have the same debate.
Goldie, I think you have a question.
How have you and what will you do to advocate for the district's agricultural economy?
Yeah, that's great. So there's a couple of major things federally that I think are important for agriculture. Number one is trade. And then ethanol is extremely important as well. I've been a little disappointed in the administration's ethanol response. I actually don't think it's the president. I think it's people within the administration that kind of have interest more of oil at mind. So I think we need to, so ethanol is going to be huge, right? That's the kind of the linchpin that keeps some of this together. We've sent tons of letters. We've talked to the administration. Those are important. But on trade, where I think is going to be a big issue is, we're going to have this trade tension with China for a while. Right now, the free market is kind of solving some of the trade imbalance on its own, but there's going to have to be a government response to some extent in that. And that means that agriculture will continue to be, I think, the battering ram that China uses against us on trade issues. So we need to find new markets. One thing we need to do is, I actually have advocated for plugging into the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We should have done this a while ago, but that would actually give us free trade, open trade allies all around China, which makes it really easy then, if you're a US company with production in China, to move to a country right near there and have better benefits. There's no better way to incentivize companies leaving China for friendlier areas. But I think also bringing our allies in on this battle with us. So there is a lot, actually, there's been a lot of goodwill towards the United States on this against China, more so than I thought recently, with the exception of Germany, because people are understanding that they've got to protect their supply chains too. So I think building coalitions, for instance, if China decides to retaliate on our agriculture, we actually need Brazil to stand with us and refuse to sell China the excess that they were buying from us, because now if they refuse, it's going to force the Chinese to either go elsewhere or to actually modify their behavior. So building those alliances, I think, are going to be extremely important. And of course, just, understanding what our farmers are going through right now, and working hard with them to, if it's government support when it comes to this tariffs, that's important. But farmers don't want to work for government checks. They want to work for them, for, feeding the world.
Okay.
With the wildfires, devastating flooding in the Midwest, and hurricanes, Do you believe there should be more government action when it comes to climate change? And if so, what?
Yeah, I do. And, but I think the difference is it heavy-handed government or is it free market? So if you look back at the Waxman Markey, that climate change bill that didn't make it, what they predicted under their heavy government regulation in terms of reduction of greenhouse gases, we've actually exceeded without that through the free market. That's going to be the essential part of this. Now, here's a problem, right? Exelon just announced they're going to close 2 nuclear power plants. It's not unreasonable to think the other 2 are going to go eventually. That is the best baseload power generation with zero carbon output that you can find anywhere. Makes way more power than wind, it makes way more power than solar, and it can do it consistently. It's kind of priced out of the market right now, though. So I think preserving our nuclear fleet is essential. I think understanding the role that green energy plays is essential, but also not subsidizing it to distort the whole power market. So places like, nuclear production goes out. That actually is counterproductive then in the end. So I think, I have a bill that I think we're actually going to get done this year is the energy saving performance contract in the federal government. Federal government is the largest user of energy in the country, probably in the world. And ESPCs allow a company to come in and evaluate power usage. So imagine your house, right? And they put in things to make you spend less money on energy, and they take a fraction of the money you save for themselves. So it's an amazing innovation. I do it with Representative Doyle, an amazing innovation between saving money for the government, using less energy, and incentivizing the private sector to do this stuff. So those are the kinds of things that we can make as well. What I don't want to see is big, heavy government, heavy-handed coming in, because we never do it right. The free market can always do this right if it's incentivized correctly. Shutting down nuclear plants is like 8 steps backwards in this, though.
And you've been outspoken about QAnon. At least 2 candidates for the House have expressed outward support for QAnon. Should they win, would you recommend keeping them off any committees or push to expel QAnon supporters once they are seated?
So I don't think I can push. I would never push to expel them from the House because, again, I mean, if somebody wants to elect a QAnon supporter, they can. It's a district's choice. But for the party, that's where we can have a choice, right? So if Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's the first, if she comes out here and disavows QAnon, okay, right? But if she comes out and starts spouting QAnon garbage, and it's garbage, and it's designed to destroy the country that you love, no matter if you're on the right or left, then I don't think she should be sitting on any committee, much less any committee with any importance. There's a couple we can park her on that are pointless. But I think we have to stand strong to that. My party, I've been disappointed in it at times. I'm proud of it at times. But, we have 2 parties that represent almost, 350 million Americans. But we have to fight to protect. I'm going to disagree with some of the extremes in my party, but I will definitely not just disagree, but fight hard against things that say that the federal government is actually run by a group of Satanist pedophiles, because that undermines the entire belief in the federal government and the idea of representative democracy. If I'm out here as a show and it's actually the Satanist pedophiles that are running it, that actually can incentivize violence to the government. And I don't think it's protected First Amendment speech, just like I don't think burning buildings down in the middle of big cities is protected First Amendment speech. So I'll be outspoken about it. And if you look at the not real life Twitter, you'll see that I'm outspoken because evidently I'm scared that they're getting close.
Yeah. Are you satisfied with the role being played by federal law enforcement when it comes to the conspiracy theory groups like QAnon?
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, I don't know what role federal law enforcement can play too much in it. There is a question of First Amendment, where do you cross that in terms of violence or threats of violence? I just read something that said QAnon has a foothold in 50 countries. I think the best thing that we can do is to be outspoken about it and disinfect it. So there's going to be people that no matter what, and they're smart people, will buy into it no matter what you show them. But there are a lot of people that maybe don't really want to be misled. And so if you can show them, look, the very first Q drop, as you call it, said that Hillary was going to be in jail within a month. You know, the Mueller investigation was actually a ruse by Donald Trump so that he could investigate the Democrats. And you could go down the line. None of this stuff has ever come true. So I think showing that to people is the most important. But it reminds me of, if you guys, I don't know if any of you guys paid attention to Jade Helm. So 2015, I start getting all these things from kind of the far right saying, you know, the federal government is overthrowing the Texas state government. And I'm like, well, that's insane, right? That's just insane. But what happened is the US military had an exercise called Jade Helm where they practice urban combat. This happens all the time. And actually found out Russia pushed this conspiracy theory that actually now they were going to overthrow the Texas government because it was Barack Obama was president. And in fact, the Texas governor activated the state guard, which like is insane to monitor it. He knew it was insane. Once you start feeding these things, these conspiracy theories, they'll just grow on their own until they're out of control. So don't be scared of them. I tell my other colleagues, I've actually had a lot of colleagues call me and tell me thank you for being outspoken because it gave them the courage to do it. But I said, you know, why would you not? Like, do you really want to serve where stuff like QAnon is being accepted as a possibility? Okay. Unless you're a Satanist pedophile, and then, you know.
Do you, Congressman, are you going to vote for Donald Trump? And can you explain why or why not?
Yeah, I will. You know, look, as I tell people, I'm disappointed in the president's tone, and quite often I call him out on that. I think a president needs to be a unifier. I think a president needs to bring people together. But I also think issues are important. I think, you know, taking on China is important. I think the economy is important. And quite honestly, you know, as a representative, I'm a Republican, and my district votes for me, and my district's going to vote for Donald Trump. So I think there's an aspect of interest there as well. But you know, look, I look at, I mean, let's just be honest. You look at the big cities and what's going on. It took a while for the left and Joe Biden to call out the violence in our cities, and it's not equated to anything. It's terrible. I'm a National Guard pilot. I reacted to Minneapolis, and I'll tell you, the second the National Guard showed up in force in Minneapolis, the protest became peaceful, right? Then, you know, they were around where George Floyd was killed, and it was peaceful protest because we had to put that force in there to say, look, you can be heard by the First Amendment, but you can't be violent. That is not protected First Amendment speech. And I see the reaction is always slow to do that. And there's, you know, you look at Kenosha, et cetera. But I will vote for Donald Trump because I think he's going to be the guy that's best fit of the two to lead us out of this tough situation. When I see my Democratic friends attacking Trump for the economy, and I know dang well that we had the best economy before we went into COVID lockdown, it's disingenuous. So that's where I am. But I'm not going to, my job as a member of Congress isn't to be a drone for a party. My job is to represent 700,000 people, and I'm going to continue to do that no matter what the cost is.
What would you say are the key differences between you and your opponent, and why should people vote for you?
Well, I haven't studied my opponent a lot, but if she, you know, comes in line with kind of typical, I guess we'll call it left-wing philosophy in this case, I have heard, you know, obviously discussions when it comes to the violence in the city. I think we take a very different approach. My belief is that we should obviously hear these concerns, work on racial justice as much as we can, but we also have to have order. I think when it comes to future U.S. engagements militarily, as an example, we have to have the strongest military in the world, continue to invest in it, and use it very sparingly, but understand that we have a unique role to play in the world. Only America, only the United States of America can be, in essence, a world leader. And, to peace and to future and to prosperity, because if we're not writing the rules of the road for the world, China, Russia will, or chaos will ensue. That's a very important role as well there. And of course, then you could go down the line on every issue, whether it's taxation, whether it's healthcare. There's very much differences, but I'll just tell you, I have no ill will towards anybody I ever run against. I actually have a lot of respect for her being willing to take on this fight. Running for Congress isn't easy, and I wish her the best of luck, but not too much luck in November.
So to kind of wrap things up, why should people vote for you?
So look, I made a promise when I ran in 2010 that, every 2 years I would evaluate if my heart is in it and if I'm still the right person for the job. And I do that every 2 years. Even if I know I'm going to run again, I take some time to go through the whys. And look, I love this country, right? I love the 16th district of Illinois. I love the fact that I'm a middle class kid. My dad ran a homeless shelter. My mom was a public school teacher who, made the decision that he was going to run for Congress, and somehow miraculously among 700,000 people won. And, but I also think beyond that, fighting for the needs of the district is essential. And I'm passionate about doing that, but also fighting for the future of this country and the role in this country. I think I have a unique perspective. A lot of people don't like to talk about foreign policy. They say, well, that doesn't matter. I think it really does matter. And you don't know it matters until you find yourself in a really bad situation in which you realize you weren't paying attention to the things you should have for the last 5 years. So I think having that unique perspective is good, not just economically for the district, but for the safety and the future of this country. And I continue to have a passion to serve, probably more of a passion than I ever have, and whether it's in the military or in Congress. So, I would humbly ask people for their vote again. I'll continue to go work hard. And I'll tell you what, even if you don't agree with everything I do, at least I'm being honest, because if you ever meet a politician that you agree with him or her on everything, they're probably lying to you.
All right. Well, thanks again, Congressman, for being with us today and taking the time to answer our questions. And is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that's great. And I look forward to Election Day and doing this for another couple of years. I'm excited.
All right.